Today we're taking a look at the oldest branch of Order Passeriformes, the New Zealand Wrens. New Zealand wrens aren't in the same family as a lot of other birds who also happen to be called wrens. The name started out with the Eurasian wren, and from there, anytime an English-speaking naturalist came across a tiny bird with stubby wings who ate insects, they went, "Ah, I know that guy. It's a wren." So there are wrens all over the place in a couple of different families, and aside from the New Zealand wrens, they're all in suborder Passeri, which makes them songbirds. New Zealand wrens aren't songbirds, but they are pretty closely related. They're in a suborder known as Acanthisididae, a sister taxon to songbirds. But compared to suborder Passeri, suborder Acanthisididae is both ancient and extremely exclusive. While there are over 4,000 species of songbirds, there are only 8 species of New Zealand wrens, and unfortunately, only 2 of those species survive today. And since New Zealand wrens have particularly stubby wings, just these adorable tiny little baby wings, they're all either flightless or poor flyers. They don't migrate, and you'll find them only in New Zealand. We know of only 5 flightless birds in order Passeriformes. 4 of them were New Zealand wrens. The 5th was the long-legged bunting. Since all 5 of these birds are extinct today, I think we can conclude that being flightless doesn't work out well for birds small enough to be passerines. But, okay, there is one species of flightless bird alive today whose average weight of 34.5 grams is almost wren-like. The inaccessible island rail. And while that might sound like a train in a children's book, I promise that is its actual name. The inaccessible island rail is found only on Inaccessible Island. So that's what it takes to be a tiny flightless bird. Being inaccessible, especially to rodents, cats, and mustelids like weasels, ferrets, and stoats. Even within an order of pretty small birds, New Zealand wrens are quite petite. In fact, the Rifleman is New Zealand's smallest bird. These little guys make up for their dinky wings by having giant feet to help them run around on trees and rocks. Their feet are so prominent that they're basically the Quentin Tarantino movies of the bird world. Unlike most other sexually dimorphic birds, New Zealand wrens have females who are larger than the males. That's right, this is a family full of boss babes. I'm not sure if this is true for the extinct branches of the family, but it definitely is for the Rifleman and the rock wren. The males still have the distinction of being more colorful, though. So for the Rifleman and the rock wren, the smaller end of their size range is typical for the males, and the larger end is typical for the females. I got the weight of a few everyday objects from the measureofthings.com, and I've added them to the bottom of this chart for the sake of comparison. You might notice that a female rifleman is about the same weight as a human eye. I'm not sure why the measureofthings.com considers a human eye an everyday object that we might have a frame of reference for. It isn't something we usually get to hold in our hands. If you have held a human eye in your hands, please don't tell me about it. Or do, I don't know, maybe it's a funny story. Just please don't confess to murder in my comments section. A typical rifleman is about the size of a golf ball. Weight-wise, though, they're much lighter, so the golf ball is way down at the other end of the graph. As you can see, the range here is pretty wide, with the South Island Stout-Legged Wren weighing almost 9 times as much as the Rifleman. Different taxonomic systems either list the North and South Island Stout-Legged Wrens as separate species, or move the North Island under the South Island and list it as a subspecies. I don't know why the North Island is the one that gets folded into someone else's species, but I imagine they follow a similar system that my cats do, which is, well, I'm bigger, so clearly I'm the main guy here. Either way, their difference of 5 grams in weight is pretty significant at this size. So let's take a look at the individual species. I'd like to end on a high note, so let's go from deadest to most alive. The St. Bathans wren. This wren is in disguise. Why? Because I have no idea what it looked like. But listen, that isn't a me problem. No one really knows. We only have 4 bones to prove that it ever existed at all. but you can tell a few things from just 4 bones. Well, some people can. I can't. Would he have worn a little outfit like this? We may never know. What we do know about the St. Bathans wren is that it was alive somewhere between 16 and 19 million years ago in St. Bathans. Its closest relative is the Rifleman, and it was roughly the same size. Probably. And that's pretty much it. The long-billed wren. We've got a few more than 4 bones from these guys, but not by a lot. We have remains from a total of 4 different sites from what looks to be 6 different individuals, all found in caves. We know from the shape of their wings that they were flightless. It looks like these birds went extinct soon after the Maori first discovered New Zealand, most likely killed off by Pacific rats. Since there are no rodents who are native to New Zealand, when Pacific rats stowed away on Maori boats, they found an environment with plenty of prey species who weren't prepared to defend themselves. Since many of the New Zealand wrens nest on the ground, they were particularly susceptible to the threat of egg-stealing rats. And all you have to go on here is my goofy little drawing, which frankly puts you at a real disadvantage. I definitely didn't draw its feet big enough for one thing. And I put it standing up oddly so it'd fit into my weight graph for another. Please don't show this video to any actual wildlife artists. The North Island Stout-Legged Wren and the South Island Stout-Legged Wren. Okay, we already established that the South Island Stout-Legged Wren is the main guy, so the only photo you get here is from that one, but only the skull. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules and we don't have photos of birds that went extinct before photography was invented. Both of these species were flightless. We know from both their bone structure and because they were commonly found in fossil sites that were basically pitfall traps. So these guys wouldn't have fared too well in a Looney Tunes cartoon. They lived in forests, although the South Island Stout-Legged Wrens were more versatile and would live in pretty much any kind of forest, while the North Island Stout-Legged Wrens stuck to podocarp and broadleaf forests like this one. Since we don't have any photos of the Stout-Legged Wrens, please use your imagination and picture some weird little birds running around in here. Because of their foot structure, it looks like these guys didn't do much perching and mostly stood on solid ground. They also had strong, stout legs that probably made them good runners. So despite the fact that they'd probably fall for Wile E. Coyote's tricks, they do have something in common with the roadrunner. Like the long-billed wren, they went extinct sometime between the 13th and 17th centuries, most likely killed off by Pacific rats who moved to New Zealand when humans did. Although we know they did have at least one predator endemic to New Zealand because their remains were often found in laughing owl middens. A midden is basically a big pile of whatever is left over from food. But I gave this laughing owl a garbage bin because looking at someone else's trash is kind of gauche. The Lyall's wren. Okay, now we have the Lyall's wren, which fortunately survived long enough that you can take a look at some drawings of them done by somebody other than me. By the way, any art that isn't mine comes from Wikimedia Commons, and you'll find links to them in my list of sources in the description below. The Lyall's wren is also known as the Stevens Island wren. We do have subfossil remains that prove it used to live on both the North and South Islands in New Zealand, but it likely suffered the same fate as the long-billed and stout-legged wrens and went extinct there pretty soon after humans and rats showed up. So why the Stevens Island wren? Well, in the late 1800s, when some folks moved out to Stevens Island to establish and maintain a lighthouse, it turned out that some of these birds had been chilling out there in this predator-free space. Or should I say, predator-free until the lighthouse people showed up with cats. The Lyall's wren was flightless, and the lighthouse keepers described them as scurrying among the rocks like mice. It seems like in these areas that were rodent-free, New Zealand wrens often evolved to act more like mice, because it was more energetically efficient not to fly, and they didn't really have a need to. These guys were also noted to have been semi-nocturnal. The commonly spread story is that this whole species was killed off by a single cat by the name of Tibbles. I demand justice for poor Tibbles. The actual story goes something like this. In January of 1894, assistant lighthouse keeper David Lyall and his cat Tibbles moved to Stevens Island with 16 other people. Tibbles likely wasn't the only cat in this group, but if the other cats didn't come right away, then they must have been dropped off by supply and trading ships not too long after, because records show that by 1895 a colony of feral cats is firmly established on the island. When Tibbles brought home one of the wrens, Lyall preserved the specimen and asked the captain of a supply ship to bring it back to Wellington to show it to Walter Buller, a well-known naturalist. Buller was thrilled to receive it because he recognized that the bird was a new species. He sent the specimen to an artist in London to get an illustration of the bird, with plans to publish in a journal called Ibis. The illustrator to whom he sent the specimen was this guy, J.G. Ceulemans, who actually drew all 3 of the images I'm using for the Lyall's wren in this section, and some of the art in the bush wren section. A natural history dealer named Henry Travers caught wind of the new bird and went to Stevens Island to convince Lyall to sell any new specimens to him. Although Travers often sold specimens to Walter Buller, he decided to first try getting more money from someone else. So he wrote to Walter Rothschild in London and, as he had hoped, sold the new specimens for more than Buller was offering. And now we get Walter with an impressive mustache versus a different guy named Walter with an impressive mustache. Rothschild wrote a paper on the bird for the British Ornithologists Club. When he presented it, the editor for the Ibis, who was at the meeting, pointed out that Buller already had a paper on this new bird ready for publication except for the completion of the illustration. Ultimately, that didn't matter, though. Rothschild took the faster route to publication, and because he published first, he got to name the bird, Traversia lyalli, after David Lyall and Henry Travers, pushing out Buller's name for it, Xenakis insularis. These 2 grown men spent the rest of their lives bickering over the situation. A letter from Travers, highlighting the dire situation of the Lyall's wren to drive up the price of his specimens, states, "In a short time there will not be many left, as the cats have become wild and are making sad havoc amongst all the birds." Since he referenced cats here, we can conclude that Travers, at least, isn't trying to pin all the blame on Tibbles. In 1905 and 1907, Rothschild published the story of the Lyall's wren and declared that they had been exterminated by a single cat. But having never been to the island himself, we have to assume that this was a misunderstanding or a distortion of what he was told by Travers. And here's a photo of Walter Rothschild riding a giant tortoise. It isn't exactly relevant to our story, but I thought you should know that in other circumstances, good old Walt really did know how to have a fun time. But back to poor, maligned Tibbles. I mean, Tibbles definitely killed a number of Lyall's wrens, but he can't be blamed for the extinction of the whole species. And it's because of Tibbles sometimes bringing these birds to David Lyall that we have any feathered specimens of them at all, because none of the humans on the island were ever able to catch any of them. But, of course, whether by one cat or many, the Lyall's wren was still eradicated. The bush wren. You may say, we made it all the way up to the 20th century. Surely whatever wrens are left to talk about are still alive. But alas, no. The bush wren went extinct in 1972. Despite an attempt to rescue the bush wren by rounding up and relocating some to a predator-free island, conservationists were only able to catch 6, and it was too little, too late. The last known sighting of the bush wren was in their new home. 2 of them were seen in 1972, but none have been spotted since. So either they're extinct or they're really invested in playing hide and seek. But we do know a few things about the bush wren. They flew, but according to naturalist Guthrie Smith, they were poorer flyers than the rock wren, who themselves spend a lot more time scurrying than flying. Guthrie Smith also notes that they spent a lot of time continually updating their nests, replacing damp bits with fresh feathers or plant materials, unlike the rock wren, who take care to build a waterproof nest at the beginning of the season. I'm starting to think good old Guthrie liked the rock wrens better. Unfortunately, like the wrens who came before them, they were eradicated by introduced predators like rats, mice, and stoats. The rock wren. But thank goodness, now we come to a New Zealand wren who survives today. The rock wren. No, not this rock wren, which is a songbird and lives in North and Central America. This rock wren. This fantastic little bird is so great that it won New Zealand's Bird of the Year contest in 2022. Although 2021's winner wasn't even a bird, it was the long-tailed bat. So the honor here may be somewhat dubious. Alas, I'm not in New Zealand, so I can't ask any rock wrens what they think of that. The bad news is that these little troopers are endangered, although having learned from the fate of the bush wren, conservationists have taken up the effort to move some to areas with predator control. A group of rock wrens was relocated to Secretary Island between 2008 and 2010, and they're still doing well today. There are subfossil remains that show that the rock wren used to live in lowlands, but today they live high up in the mountains, mostly above the tree line. It's likely that they've moved up in elevation to escape predators and adapted to colder climates. Guthrie Smith, noted rock wren enthusiast, wrote that they seemed quite safe from danger, being as adaptable as they were. Unfortunately, he either overestimated the rock wren or underestimated invasive stoats, who do just fine in the cold and consider wrens and their eggs to be a tasty snack. In fact, predation by stoats and mice is so bad that the New Zealand government found that despite an 85% hatchling success rate in areas with predator control, areas without had success rates from 0 to 30%. The Maori name for the rock wren, piwowo, means little complaining bird. But frankly, having moved somewhere with snow 5 months of the year to escape predators and not getting away anyhow, I think these guys have plenty to complain about. Despite the difficulties, however, rock wrens are extremely dedicated parents and partners. They tend to be monogamous long-term, only finding a new partner if one dies. In the non-breeding season, when a mated pair forages together, they keep in touch with a continuous duet of soft chirps. Would you like to hear a rock wren duet? Too bad you can't. Most of it is so high-pitched that it's out of human hearing range. In the lead up to egg laying, the pair will build a nest together. Rock wrens will use whatever feathers they find lying around, regardless of what birds they came from. In fact, rock wrens are so feather crazy that scientists sometimes bring a few feathers when they're looking for nests, because as soon as the wren spots the feather, they'll grab it and run immediately back to their nest. Scientists also use abandoned rock wren nests to determine what kinds of birds have been in the area, which is particularly useful when they're trying to track down the critically endangered kakapo. When it's time to lay eggs, the female will lay an egg every 2 days until they have 2 to 5 eggs. Most small passerines will lay an egg every day until they're done. The eggs weigh about 1/5 of the female bird's body weight, which means that in the span of 10 days, she might be putting out her own body weight again in eggs. For comparison, a chicken who lays an egg every day will take roughly 40 days to lay enough eggs to match her own weight. It's a good thing that male rock wrens make dedicated husbands, and they make sure to bring home extra food during this time. They have only one brood per season, although if the first is lost, they may try for a second. Once the eggs have been laid, both parents incubate them equally, and later they'll feed the hatchlings equally too. Then, when either of them leaves the nest, they'll cover up the eggs in the entrance to the nest with feathers to keep the heat in. And keep the heat in it does. A rock wren nest can be up to 30 degrees inside when it's freezing outside. The site I found this info on didn't specify Celsius or Fahrenheit, but I'm pretty sure it's safe to assume Celsius, not only because both New Zealand and the scientific community tend to use it, but also because if it was Fahrenheit, they would basically just be saying, hey, if it's freezing outside, it's freezing inside too. So for those of us in the US, 30 degrees Celsius is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. It's downright toasty in that little nest. Which is good because it seems like in their nests is where rock wrens spend most of the winter. For a long time, we didn't know what rock wrens were up to in the winter. There was no evidence that they migrated anywhere, but they didn't seem equipped to handle such freezing winters, and they weren't seen in the area in winter at all. Recently, though, there have been a couple of times when a dedicated scientist or birder caught a glimpse of a rock wren running around after insects to eat. So now, our best guess is that they go into a state of semi-hibernation during the winter and come out when they need to get some grub. And rock wrens are pretty good little insect hunters, even though they do sometimes need to bash their prey against a rock to break it into edible pieces. It's tough to be such a tiny hunter. Although they're considered to be poor flyers, they might well be the best flyers in the New Zealand wren family, as they're the most likely to catch a bug mid-flight. Overall, though, they spend a lot more time on the ground, and they're known for their bobbing motion and flicking their wings before taking off, kind of like a video game idle motion, and then bouncing off with both feet moving together. The Rifleman. Okay, now on to the most alive New Zealand wren, the Rifleman. How is the Rifleman more alive than the rock wren, you ask? Well, while the rock wren is endangered, the Rifleman is faring quite a bit better. There are two subspecies of Rifleman, and although the North Island subspecies is declining, the South Island subspecies is listed as not threatened, and seem to be holding steady in their population numbers. However, because they're non-migratory and poor flyers, if they do get wiped out from a particular forest, it's unlikely that other Riflemen will move back in. Just to be on the safe side, some of the North Island Riflemen have been moved to a predator-free island. The island does not, however, appear to be bully-free. Some of the local bellbirds seem to be suffering from only child who is new to daycare syndrome, and they are not too keen on sharing space. While they haven't hurt their local riflemen, they do sometimes scream and chase them around a bit. In these predator-free environments, riflemen occasionally forage for bugs on the ground, but otherwise they spend a lot of time up in the trees looking for insects in the canopy or on tree trunks. Where the rock wrens live, most of the vegetation is pretty low to the ground, but riflemen are mostly in mature forests up in tall trees. They use those big old feet of theirs to run right up and down the tree trunks, and when they do fly, it tends to be from one tree to a nearby one. The green color that the males sport inspired both their Maori name and their English one. In Maori, they're called titipunamu, referring to this stone, known as New Zealand jade or greenstone. In English, rifleman refers to the green uniforms that the riflemen in the military used. Were they trying to say something by naming their smallest bird after the military? I don't know. While both rock wrens and riflemen are monogamous partners who work together to take care of their babies, there are a few differences in their breeding styles. Riflemen often have two broods during a breeding season. Perhaps this is because, in addition to being in a warmer climate, they also use cooperative breeding. Other members of the kin group will help to feed the babies starting at about 5 days after hatching. Riflemen are pretty friendly to each other overall. While they do have territories, they're mostly just places where they tend to be. They aren't territorial. They don't announce their territory like other birds often do, and if a new rifleman moves into the neighborhood, they don't seem to mind too much. They're just helpful, loving little dudes. Unless you're an insect, I guess. Thanks so much for coming with me to learn about New Zealand wrens. Any artwork that isn't mine and all of the photography are from Wikimedia Commons. The sources for that and for my research are listed in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time when we learn about another tiny insectivore, phoebes. And the lighthouse keepers describe them as scurrying among the rocks like rice. Like rice.